So today I thought we'd look at probably one of the most common issues that you're going to have to deal with when you own a bicycle, which is fixing a flat tire. Now, the first thing you're going to have to do is remove the tire from the bike. And to do that, a lot of the times you have to release the brakes. Now, in the case of this particular bike, this is a disc brake, so you don't have to release the brakes. But in the case of when you have other style brakes, like we have the cantilever style here, you have to release the little detent there, and on V-brakes you have to sort of pinch it together and release the brakes that way. So you'll have to release your brakes in order to get the wheel off of it. Going back to our bike that we're working on today, since there are no cantilever or V-brakes, all we're going to do is release the quick release on it. Now, this particular bike has a quick release. There are a lot of bikes that have bolts that hold the front wheel on, so you'll need the appropriate size wrench in order to do that. Most are a 15 millimeter, but you may have something different. So just go ahead and release your front wheel, or back wheel for that matter. So what we're going to want to do next is remove the tire from the rim. And of course there are a number of different tools that are available for removing tires from rims, these little tire tools. Some are metal, some are nylon and plastic. The metal tools are really great if you've got a very tight tire, but they can tend to pinch the tubes very easily, where the plastic ones are a little more rounded over and they tend to be a little bit nicer if you're trying to keep your tube. In a case like this where we've already got a flat tire, it really doesn't matter what you use. You could use a screwdriver if you needed to, since the end result is to replace the tube. And I know there's a lot of guys out there that like to patch their tubes when they get flats. I generally only recommend that if it's an emergency and you need to just get back home. Just give it a quick patch and then make your way back, and then eventually replace it with a new tube, because those patches don't tend to last that long. So in the long run, once you've got a punctured tube, it's a good idea to go ahead and just replace the tube. So what we're going to do, you can notice with some of these tools there's a little hook on one end. So it's got the sort of spoon end that goes between the bead and the rim, and then it's got this little hook that you can hook onto the spokes in order to secure the tool so that it doesn't move. So if you have a very tight fit on your tire and you can't hold the tool in place, it hooks in, and then you can just do the next tool and just continue around until you release the tire from the rim. And in this case, this tire is pretty loose fitting, so we could actually literally just go in with our hands and remove it. But in the case of some of the like road tires that are the very thin, like 700C tires, those can be very tight fitting. So we're going to go ahead and remove this completely from the rim. And it's good to do a little bit of detective work when you are replacing a flat tire or a blown tube, in that you want to know exactly what caused the problem in the first place, because if you got a puncture, say from a nail or something that went into the tire and the nail is still in there, it can just puncture the next tube that you put in. So it's a good idea to go through and look for any kind of punctures that are in it. Just sort of feel your way around the inside of the tire. I would do it gently, because if there's something like glass or, you know, some sharp metal protruding into there, you can chop your fingers up pretty easily, which I have done quite a bit in the past. So just go around, cover the entire tire, look for any kind of nails or staples or anything that might be protruding out. And in this case, we seem to have a pretty clean tire. This particular tire's got a lot of tread left on it, so it's not a case of the tire wore all the way through the tread into the tube, so this tire is still usable again. You also want to check the condition of the bead on the tire, because the bead can separate from the tire and allow the tube to slip out between the tire and the rim and cause blowouts. So essentially the bead is this ring around the inside of the tire. It's a raised portion that has a cable that runs through it, and that cable grabs onto the rim. We'll go over that a little bit more, but it's important to make sure that the bead has not separated from the tire. So give that a good inspection, make sure that your bead is good and the tire is not dry rotted, in which case it's time to just go ahead and replace the tire as well. So the next thing I like to do is to inspect the old tube to try to get an idea of where the actual puncture occurred, just to check to see if we can locate what may have happened with maybe the rim or the tire. So we're going to go ahead and inflate it and look for where the puncture is on the tube. I can hear it, and there it is right here. We have a very small puncture on the inside of the tube. So if the puncture was on the outside of the tube, we would know that something protruded into the tire. In this case, it was on the inside. So what we want to look for on the rim is, number one, is the spoke protector, this little strip that goes around the outside of the rim. Is that in place? Sometimes you can get this to be out of place, in which you get the sharp edges of the spokes can protrude through and pop your tube. So we want to just sort of run our hand around the rim just to see if there's any kind of protrusions or sharp edges on it. Seems like it's clean, so in this case, based on the location of the puncture, it's most likely what happened was this guy was probably running low on air and hit a pothole or maybe a curb, and it caused the tube to pinch inside of the tire, which will cause it to puncture. So one reason to make sure that you keep your tire pressure up. If you're running on low pressure, it's real easy to cause those kind of punctures. So we need to get the proper size tire or tube for the tire. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the tire here to get an idea of what size tube is recommended for it. So this is a 26 by 2.1. So I took the liberty of going ahead and picking out the proper tube for that. So this here is the 26, and usually tubes will fit a range of tire sizes. So this does from 1.75 to 2.45, so this is well inside of the range of what this tire is requiring. Another thing you need to be concerned about is the height of the rim. In this case, this has got sort of a double-walled rim, which is very tall compared to, say, a flat rim, which doesn't have any kind of height to it. The concern with that is that if it's too tall, you need to have a very long air nozzle in order to be able to go all the way through your rim. So this particular one has a 48 millimeter nozzle or air nozzle on it. So you can see this is fairly long, so this will be able to go well through. And you can usually just look at the original tube to get an idea of how big the original fill valve was, and just make sure you've got something at least big enough. One thing that's also important to mention is that you get a tube with the proper air valve on it. Basically, they usually fall into one of two types. There's the Schrader and there is the Presta valve. The Schrader is the kind that you're used to. It's the same kind that your car has on it. The Presta, on the other hand, has a fairly unique design to it. Essentially, to put air in it, you need to unthread this little fitting on the top of it, and that allows air to escape from it. Now, you can either buy an air pump that's specifically designed for Presta valves, or you can just get a little adapter like this. This just basically fits on over the Presta valve, and then it turns it into a Schrader, so you can just use a standard air chuck on it and fill the tire up from there. Once you've filled the tube up, you want to go ahead and remove the adapter from the air nozzle, and then you want to thread back in the little fitting on the top of it so that the air does not escape. If you leave that open, it's possible for the air to escape out of the valve. So what a lot of people do is they'll just take the adapter and just screw it on backwards on top of it, and that sort of acts like your valve cap. So if you're going to get new tubes, make sure if your existing tires or wheels are set for Presta valves that you get Presta valve tubes for it. If you're going to Walmart or some place like that, or Target, your choices are going to be fairly limited, so going to a bike store might be your best bet. And I would recommend take the old tube and tire with you so that they can match it up, so that both the tube is set up, like if you look at this tube, it has a range of sizes that it's designed for. Whoever is working at the bike shop should know enough to get you the proper tube to match up with whatever tire you have on the bike. So we've matched up both the diameter of the tube and the air nozzle to make sure that's going to fit in. Before I put this back onto the wheel, I like to pre-inflate the tube a little bit. Not all the way, just get a little bit of air into it so that it takes shape. You don't want to try to put a completely flat tube into a tire. You want to put some air into it so that it holds its shape, and then we're going to feed that into the tire. Reason you don't want to do it flat is because if you do it flat, it can get twisted inside of there, and then when you fill it up with air, it can pinch itself and then it'll blow itself again. So it's a good idea to pre-inflate it so that it holds its shape and doesn't cause you any problems. You want to see if this is a directional tire. This particular tire is not a directional tire. It'll usually have an arrow pointing in the direction that the wheel turns, so just make sure you put the tire on so that it rotates in the proper direction. There are some tires that will, depending on whether it's the front or the rear tire, will go in opposite directions. So just take a look at the writing on the outside of the tire, and it'll usually have some sort of directional information on there if it is a directional tire. Not all tires are directional. So we're going to go ahead. The way I like to do it is I'll feed the air valve through first to get that centered, and then I'll just sort of work the tire back onto the rim. Just go all the way around. Mountain bike tires like this tend to be a little bit looser fitting on the rim, so it's a little bit of an easier job to do. So we're going to go ahead and finish installing the other side of the tire onto the rim. And with some tires, because of their loose fitting, you can just use your hands to do it. In fact, I recommend in most cases, if you can just muscle it onto the rim without using any tools, is usually the best, because you're not going to pinch the tube in there. But there are going to be situations where you just can't muscle it through. So what you will have to do is use one of your tire tools in order to leverage the tire back onto the rim. Just be careful that you do not pinch the tube inside of the tire there. And that's one reason why it's good to leave a little bit of air in the tube when you're installing it, because it sort of keeps it out of the way so that it doesn't get pinched. From this point, you can go ahead and inflate the tire. It's a good idea to check the tire for whatever the recommended inflation pressure is. And while you're doing that, you're also going to set the bead. So the bead is actually going to lock into the rim. In most cases, it will just slide in on its own. There are some cases where you'll look at it and it just will not fit in properly, in which case it's good to get a little bit of a solution of like dish detergent and water and wet it down to lubricate it so that those parts slide back together and lock properly. So we're going to go ahead and inflate it. A lot of the time you can hear the bead pop into place and you know that it's set properly. So let's go ahead and inflate this. One thing that you need to do on occasion is sometimes you'll have to overinflate the tire a little bit to get it to actually push the bead into the proper notch that it fits into. You can also look at the markings on the tire and make sure that they're even all the way around. A lot of the time when you rotate the tire, you can look to see if there is any unevenness to it, where you'll see the tire actually bumping up and down because one side will be pushed in unevenly. But it's a good idea to make sure that the tube or the tire is fully seated into the bead so that it rides smoother. So we're going to go ahead and install the tire back on the bike. If the bike has any kind of wheel locks, make sure they line up properly. Usually there's little detents that they'll fit into depending on the design of it. This one's got little sort of washer type things on it that fit into some holes to keep the wheel from falling off if the axle is not put on properly. And with these, I like to tighten it, snug it up using the nut, and then using the lever on the far end to go ahead and tighten it down that way. And make sure that the tire is sitting in the middle of the fork. You don't want it to be sitting cockeyed, you know, like that. You want it to actually sit in the middle. Sometimes it's helpful to actually set the bike down on the tire so that the weight is evenly distributed and you can make sure that the tire is sitting right where it needs to be. So that's about it. If you have more questions, feel free to bring your bike in. We do these kind of repairs every single day. If you're not feeling up to doing it yourself, we'll be glad to do it for you. And we'll We'll see you on the next time.